They mocked him, an Alpha King who could not even shift, right before the eyes of the entire kingdom.
He's a
Weak,
craven fool,
broken, a disgrace
Too
to the
weak to
throne.
hold the border.
In the eyes of everyone,
Let the North
Draven
take
was no
you.
king, but merely an error to be eliminated, and Hael had once believed it, until the night he
Unworthy.
nearly died, the night he should
He
have
is no
died.
match for her.
Damn it, I
Blood
just
stained
can't
the
seem to
cold
get this
stone
right.
floor. Draven's breathing was so faint it nearly
Keep trying,
vanished.
lad.
His body lay motionless,
Almost the
growing
time is
cold,
right.
as if one more
He's
missed beat would mean
isolated.
he would never wake
We
again.
remove him
Hael
tonight.
knelt beside him. This should have been the end of a feeble king.
Not long
But
now.
then, she touched him, and in that exact moment,
ready.
everything went wrong. Beneath that seemingly lifeless
Remember the
skin,
plan.
something was stirring. Not weakness, not fragility, but something being suppressed. Something chaotic,
Hurry with
so
the water.
violent that if released, it would tear everything apart. And then, Draven's hand snapped up.
She must.
It constricted around Hael's
No!
wrist, so
Draven,
powerful that
what
her bones
happened?
nearly shattered. Unable
Stay
to
back, Your
move,
Grace.
We
unable
must
to breathe,
alert the guard.
she could only stare into his eyes.
Draven, please
And in
wait.
that moment,
Hold
the
the
truth
cloth
emerged.
tight. He's fading.
It was not
No,
the
no,
weakness
not
the
now.
entire kingdom believed
Draven,
in.
hear me.
It was something entirely different, something that should not exist. But then, Draven halted the moment he realized it was her. The grip slowly loosened, as if he were pulling
Draven,
himself
it's
back
just
from the
me.
brink. Not because he was weak, but because he was restraining himself. And that was when Hael understood. The Alpha King, whom everyone ridiculed, had never been weak.
I remember.
Part I, The Scorned King.
Did he hurt her?
Chapter 1. The Alpha King who cannot shift. They mocked him. An Alpha King who could not even shift,
It's all right.
right before the eyes of the entire kingdom. Weak, broken, a disgrace to the throne, in the eyes of everyone. Draven was no king, but merely an error to be eliminated, and no one attempted to hide it. An Alpha stepped out from the ranks, the sound of his boots
shouldn't be
echoing
here.
across the cold stone floor,
speak
slow,
later.
deliberately prolonging each beat. He stopped before Draven, close enough to provoke, close enough to turn everything into a public insult. "Are you truly our king?" His voice was not loud, yet it rippled through the hall. A few laughs broke out, then several more, no longer concealed. Even shifting is something you cannot do. He curled his lip. "So then, what are you?" No one stopped him. No one spoke up, because they all thought the same. Hael stood in the back, observing in silence. She had heard the rumors of an Alpha King without a wolf, a broken king, and what was unfolding before her seemed to confirm it all. Draven did not react. He did not deny. He did not fight back. He only stood there, as if those words had never even touched him. But something was wrong. It was not his posture. It was not his silence. It was the sensation. A void so cold it made others unconsciously want to pull away. "Perhaps we should see," the Alpha continued, taking another step. "See whether our king is worthy of standing there." He stopped directly in front of Draven. The distance was but a single breath. "Or perhaps you are merely a pretender." The laughter this time rang out clearly, spreading across the hall. Draven still did not react, only lowering his gaze to look at him, silent. And then, his eyes changed. There was no warning sign, no movement, but the air, it thickened. In a corner of the hall, a glass in the hand of an Alpha suddenly cracked. A thin fissure ran down the body of the glass. He stiffened, frowning, not yet understanding what had just happened. Another man unconsciously retreated half a step. No one noticed, except Hael. Her heart skipped a beat. The pressure did not come from the outside. It came from exactly where Draven stood, cold, heavy, invisible, as if letting go even slightly would crush everything. Then it vanished, as quickly as it had appeared. The glass stopped cracking. The air returned to normal. The laughter continued as if nothing had happened. Draven still stood there silent, empty, unresponsive. But this time, Hael no longer believed in what she saw. That was not a weakling, and if that were true, then the Alpha King whom the entire kingdom was ridiculing had never been weak. Chapter 2. The night he nearly died. The night was unnervingly quiet. No wind, no sound of sentries, none of the usual echoes of a living palace. Everything seemed strangled in a silence so heavy it was difficult to breathe. Hael halted in the middle of the corridor, a chill running down her spine. Something was wrong, her gaze fixed on the door to Draven's chambers. It was ajar, only a sliver, but enough for the scent of blood to spill out. Hael pushed the door open. The room was dark. The curtains were shredded. The night wind crept in, cold as a blade, and in the center of the room, Draven had fallen. Blood stained the stone floor, spreading beneath his body, slow but relentless. He should have been dead. Hael knelt beside him, her hand touching skin so cold it made her heart sink. His breathing was so feeble it was almost non-existent. No one was here. No one knew. No one came to save him, except for her. For a healer, death was no stranger. But never before had she sensed anything like this. Hael placed her hand on his chest, channeling energy, trying to anchor the life slipping from his body. But the instant her power touched him, she stiffened. There was something inside. Not a heart, not veins, but something else chaotic, violent, compressed to the point of distortion. It was as if a storm were locked inside a dying frame. Hael tightened her grip, but the sensation did not vanish. It surged back against her own chest, making her breath hitch. This was not a dying body. This was something being held back. And then, Draeven's hand snapped up, constricting around her wrist. Swift, decisive, unwavering. The force was so powerful her bones nearly shattered. The pain jolted through her, sharp and vivid, paralyzing her entire frame. She could not pull away, could not move, could not breathe. Draeven's eyes opened, not fully awake, not entirely conscious, but staring straight at her. There was no weakness, no fading haze of a dying man. Only something so cold it could stop a heart. The grip tightened. Just a little more and her bones would snap. But then, it halted. Not abruptly, but slowing down, as if something were pulling him back from within. His gaze remained locked on hers. And this time, there was awareness, faint, but real. His fingers loosened bit by bit until the pressure vanished completely. His hand fell away. His body became motionless once more. It was as if that moment had never existed, but Hael's wrist still throbbed, and her heart was still in turmoil. This time, she could no longer deceive herself. Whatever lay inside Draeven was something that should not exist. Chapter 3. Eyes and Secrets. The room remained submerged in darkness, save for a single small lamp on the table, its flame flickering as feebly as if it might extinguish at any moment. Draeven lay motionless on the cold stone floor. The bleeding had been stilled, yet his body had not fully stabilized. His breathing remained weak, though no longer as fragile as before. Something had changed, not obvious, not easily perceived, yet enough to ensure Hael could not walk away. She stayed there, kneeling beside him, her hand placed upon his chest, once more slower, more cautious. This time, it was not to save him, but to understand him. For a healer, death was no stranger. But never before had she sensed anything like this. Not every healer could perceive energy at this magnitude, but Hael had always been different, and for the first time, that difference made her hesitate. Her power seeped into his frame, navigating through every vein and every faint pulse until it struck it. Not a flow, not an organ, but something entirely alien. A seal. It was unlike anything Hael had ever felt. It was not natural, nor was it chaotic. On the contrary, it was too perfect. Thick, solid, and precise to the point of absolute. A structure crafted not in panic, but in total command. Yet, what chilled her to the bone was not the seal itself, but what lay behind it. A colossal pressure, suppressed and violent like a storm locked within a space far too small. It was not still. It thrashed incessantly against the seal, beat after beat, each stronger than the last, as if a single tiny fissure would be enough to tear everything apart. Hael tightened her grip, her heart rate beginning to spiral out of control. If that thing escaped, nothing would remain. And then, she realized the truth that made everything even more terrifying. This seal was not distorted. It was not forced. It had been crafted perfectly, from within. No one had done this to him. No one except himself, Alpha King Draeven. He was not being imprisoned. He had locked himself away. The lamp flickered violently, the flame swaying as the shadows in the room seemed to thicken. Hael withdrew her hand, her breathing no longer steady, not because she was afraid, but because she had just touched a secret that should not exist. And then what have you seen? The voice rang out, low and calm. It did not sound like someone who had just been on the brink of death. Hael stiffened. She lifted her head. Draeven had opened his eyes. He did not move, did not sit up, showed no sign of weakness. He simply lay there, staring directly at her. And this time, Hael could not be mistaken. Those eyes did not belong to a weakling. They did not belong to an ordinary alpha. Too still, too deep, as if behind them, there was no bottom. Hael did not answer, not because she refused to, but because for the first time, she did not know what to say. The room fell into silence. But it was no longer the silence of the night. It was the silence of a secret that had just been touched. And Hael knew, from this moment on, she had stepped into something she should never have meddled in. Chapter 4. I Know You Know. The room remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of a place that had just escaped death. It was heavier, deeper, as if the air itself were withholding something that should never be uttered. Draven still lay there, his gaze never wavering from Hael, not hurried, not pressuring, yet enough to make every thought sharper than necessary. There was no second question, no explanation, only a truth existing between them that both understood. Hael did not look away. The distance between them had not changed, yet it felt far too close. It was not a physical proximity, but the proximity of a secret that had just been touched. She had seen too much, and he knew it. Neither spoke, yet words were redundant. The lamp on the table flickered slightly, its feeble light sliding across Draven's face, revealing more clearly the unnatural stillness in his eyes. It was not the exhaustion of a man who had nearly died. It was not the turmoil of someone losing control. It was absolute command, as if everything that had just occurred was merely a fraction of what he was holding back. You saw it. His voice was low, steady, not a question. Hael did not answer, but neither did she deny. Draven's gaze lingered on her a beat longer, as if weighing something that should not exist. It was not suspicion, nor was it caution, but an appraisal. Not everyone can see to that extent. The statement was soft, almost impassive, yet it was enough to shift the atmosphere between them. It was no longer a secret discovered. It was a secret acknowledged. Hael stood her ground, neither retreating nor evading. For the first time, she did not try to deny her own perception. That thing inside him, the thing she had touched, it was still there, silent but ever present. You should leave. Draven's voice rose again, low and calm. It was not a command. It was not coercion. It was merely a warning presented as a self-evident truth. Hael did not move, did not turn away. She only watched him. A beat of silence stretched. Draven slowly sat up. The movement was not rushed, nor was it weak. He did not resemble a man who had just clawed his way back from the brink of death. Instead, it was as if his body had recovered sufficiently, or perhaps he had never been as feeble as people believed. The distance between them tightened, not because anyone moved closer, but because neither retreated. Do not try to understand me. His voice dropped lower, closer. It was not threatening, yet it was heavy. Doing so will make you a target. The warning was clear, unconcealed, and without explanation. Hael continued to look at him, without fear, without evasion. She simply did not leave. Another beat of silence passed, longer and deeper, as if the room itself were waiting to see who would break it, but no one did, because there was no need. Draven knew. Hael knew. She had seen too much to return to how things were before, and he had let her see. No prevention, no erasure, no further concealment. The lamp swayed slightly, light flickering across the space between them, so close that the slightest movement would be enough to touch. But no one did. There was no need for contact. The tension remained, vivid, sharp, impossible to ignore. And in that moment, one thing became certain. Hael would not leave, even though she had been warned, even though she knew what she was stepping into. She stayed, and Draven did not stop her anymore. Part EE. The only one who remains. Chapter 5. The one who did not turn away, and the moment of touch. Rumors spread faster than the wind. Overnight, the entire palace knew that Draven had nearly died. No one spoke of it directly. No one dared to mention the details, but their gazes had shifted. It was no longer the overt ridicule from before, but a distance, cold, clear, intentional. Not a single alpha stepped into that room anymore. Not a single servant volunteered to stay. It was as if taking one more step would be enough to draw them into something they could not fathom. But Hael remained. She did not leave, not out of duty, but because she had seen too much to ever turn away. The room was the same as before, low light, heavy air. Draven sat up, leaning against the headboard, his eyes open and silent to the point of being unpredictable. He no longer bore the look of a man on the brink of death, yet it was not a normal recovery either. It was simply control, a form of control that was far too perfect. Hael approached, without hesitation, without question. Her hand settled on his wrist, checking his pulse. Steadier, yet not normal. She moved her hand toward the wound, beginning to channel energy slow and rhythmic, carefully avoiding a deep touch to the thing suppressed within him. But despite her caution, She still sensed it silent, yet ever present, like a storm waiting behind a flawless shell. She did not stop. And then, Draven held her back. His fingers constricted around her wrist, not forcefully, not painfully, but enough to prevent her from withdrawing. Hael stiffened, her gaze lifted, meeting his. The proximity between them was closer than necessary. No one advanced, yet no one retreated. The silence stretched, but this time it was no longer neutral. It carried something else tenser, more vivid. "Why do you still remain?" Draven's voice was low, not cold, not sharp, yet impossible to dismiss. Hael did not pull her hand away. She did not struggle against his hold. She only watched him. "Because you are not dead." A simple answer. But it was not the one he was asking. Draven's fingers tightened slightly, yet he did not let go. Not that answer. His voice dropped deeper. "Are you not afraid of me?" This time, the question was not like the ones before. Not a warning, not a move for control. It was real. Hael looked at him, without evasion, without hesitation. "No." A beat of silence. "Because you have never harmed me." The answer came slowly, but clearly. Draven's gaze lingered on her a beat longer. No rebuttal, no denial. He only watched, as if searching for or confirming something that even he had never been certain of. His fingers still held her wrist, not gripping, yet not releasing. For the first time, it was not out of instinct, nor a loss of control. It was conscious. Hael did not pull her hand away, not because she could not, but because she did not want to. The atmosphere between them shifted. It was no longer mere danger. It was something yet unnamed, but vivid enough to be impossible to ignore. The lamp flickered slightly, the light gliding across the space between them, bringing them so close that the slightest movement would touch so much more. But no one moved. There was only the hand, still there. And this time, Draven did not let go. Chapter 6. Conspiracies in the Shadows. The silence did not last long, but it was not broken by a loud noise, but by small changes, too small for ordinary people to notice, but clear enough to make Hael stop. The palace still functioned as usual. Sentries patrolled, servants moved, alphas appeared in the great hall as if nothing had ever happened, but their eyes had changed. No one mentioned Draven, no one stepped near his area, as if only taking one more step was enough to touch something they did not want to be involved with. Hael realized it right from the next morning. Not by words, but by distance. A servant she usually met no longer looked straight at her. A sentry before Draven's door had been replaced, and the new person did not ask anything. No curiosity, no greeting, just stood there, like a wall. When passing the western corridor, Hael stopped. The medicine vial in her hand vibrated slightly as a cold wind swept past. Even though all windows were sealed shut, she did not turn her head immediately, just stood still and listened. There was nothing. No footsteps, no breathing. There was no sign of life. And that was what was wrong. She continued walking, slower. A corner of the corridor, a door slightly ajar. And this time, there was sound. Very low, very small, almost swallowed. Cannot let him continue. Last night was clear enough, if not done right now. Hael stopped, did not advance, did not reveal herself. She did not need to hear everything, because that was more than enough. Someone was planning, not to test, not to threaten, but to end. She retreated very quickly, trying not to make a sound. Heartbeat slowed down with control. She had seen Draven's blood last night, and now she knew. It was no accident. It was the first time, but it would not be the last. When returning to the room, everything was the same. Draven leaned back against the headboard, eyes open, but silent, as if he had never left that state. No sign of surprise, no reaction as if he had known beforehand. Hael set the medicine vial down. This time, she did not hide. "Someone wants to kill you." Her voice was low, but resolute. Not a suspicion, but a conclusion. Draven did not react, not surprised, just looked at her. "You have just realized." His voice was calm, almost indifferent. Hael did not answer, because she understood. He had known beforehand, and he had done nothing. A cold feeling flickered through, not because of danger, but because of realizing Draven was not just being hunted. But he seemed to be waiting. "You cannot continue like this." This time, Hael's voice was no longer neutral. Draven did not answer immediately. His gaze lingered on her a beat longer. Not to evaluate her words, but her. "You should not interfere." His voice was low, not threatening but clear. "This is none of your business." Hael did not retreat. "You will die." A simple statement, but heavy. The silence stretched between them. And then Draven stood up, slowly. Not hurried, not weak. The distance between them narrowed. The air became heavier, as if the space itself recognized something was changing. "You think you are saving me." His voice was closer, lower, although not angry but sharp and cold. Hael did not avert her eyes. "No." A beat of pause. "I just do not want you to die." The answer was straight, without evasion. Draven's gaze changed, very slightly but enough to be noticed. He stopped, did not come closer but also did not say more. Just looked at her as if seeing something that he did not expect. The room fell into silence again. But this time it was no longer just two people. Because somewhere in this palace, someone had realized that Hael was the only one near Draven, and that made her the next target. Chapter 7. Power Fracturing, and the Moment of Near Loss of Control. The cracks did not appear with a loud noise but through very small deviations, so small that if one did not pay attention, they would be easily overlooked. The lamp in Draven's room swayed slightly, even though there was no wind. The wooden tabletop occasionally emitted a thin cracking sound as if enduring invisible pressure, and those passing by that corridor all unconsciously walked faster when approaching, then left without daring to look back. No one spoke out, but everyone sensed that something was changing. Hael was the one who realized it most clearly, not by eyes, but by the familiar sensation of a healer when touching something beyond normal limits. When she placed her hand on Draven's body again, everything was still the same as he appeared on the outside. Pulse stable, breathing even, the wound recovering, but beneath that layer of stability, the seal she had touched was no longer as perfect as before. There were very small fissure lines, almost impossible to see without direct sensation, and from those fissures, energy began to leak out. It did not explode, not violent in an easily recognizable way, but it was heavy. So heavy that it caused the air in the room to become thick, as if each breath had to pass through a layer of invisible pressure. Hael tightened her hand slightly, trying to maintain focus, but this time that sensation no longer stopped at the safety boundary. The thing inside Draven was no longer fully held. It was escaping, slow but certain. "Stop!" Draven's voice rang out, low and controlled, but no longer entirely stable as before. Hael did not stop immediately. She needed to be certain. But right in that moment, the pressure in the room collapsed, not like a wind but like a weight pressing directly down on the body. Her chest constricted, breath was blocked, and this time she understood clearly that was not because she touched him, but because he could no longer hold back completely. Hael withdrew her hand immediately, not out of fear, but because she realized just a little more, the thing inside him would cross the limit. Draven did not look at her. His gaze stopped at the empty space ahead, too still, too deep. But for the first time, no longer completely within the zone of control. A sound rang out from outside, the sound of metal clashing. Fast, urgent. The door burst open before anyone in the room could react. 3 figures rushed in, completely unpredictable, without hesitation, weapons aimed directly at Draven. Hael had not yet moved when Draven stood up. Not fast, not hurried, but as soon as he moved, the air in the room changed. The pressure weighed down stronger, heavier, causing one of the 3 alphas to stiffen in a split second. Just a very small moment, but enough for everything to spiral out of control. Draven's eyes changed, no longer the stillness from before, but empty and cold. No thought, consideration, no tightly pressed control. Only pure instinct remained. The first alpha before even touching was flung back. No clear contact, no visible movement, only his body being pushed back with an invisible force, hitting the wall hard then falling down without standing up again. The other 2 retreated by reflex, not because they wanted to, but because their bodies automatically recognized danger before the mind could understand. Draven stepped up slowly, but each step caused the pressure in the room to increase. An alpha tried to rush forward, growling, trying to break the distance. A mistake. His body stopped in mid-air as if held back by an invisible hand, could not advance, could not retreat. The air constricted around him, suffocating from within. The sound of bone cracking rang out, small but clear. Hael stiffened, not out of mere fear, but because she realized Draven was no longer stopping, no longer holding, no longer controlling. The thing behind the seal was taking him over. Draven. Her voice rang out very light but clear, in that tense atmosphere. No reaction. The other alpha stopped moving, The last person tried to retreat, this time truly terrified, but could not escape. The air around him tightened, holding him in place like an invisible trap. Hael stepped forward, without thinking, without hesitation, just advanced, until standing right in front of Draeven, so close that if he lost control a little more, she would be the first to suffer the consequences. "Stop." Her voice was lower, but resolute. This time, Draeven looked at her. Only a moment, but enough to change everything. His gaze wavered, no longer completely empty, no longer completely taken over. A small space of control returned, fragile but existing. Hael did not retreat, even though she knew she was standing right before the most dangerous thing in this room. She kept her position, looking straight at him. And for the first time, Draeven retreated, not because he could not continue, but because he chose to stop. The pressure vanished almost immediately. The air in the room lightened. The body of the Alpha being held fell to the floor, motionless. No more sound, no more resistance. The room returned to quiet, but no longer like before. Hael still stood there, heart beating fast, but gaze not leaving him, because this time she had seen clearly. Not rumors, not speculation, but the truth manifesting before her eyes. Draeven was not just dangerous, he was a thing that could destroy everything, and the only thing that just stopped him was her. Chapter 8. The Unanswered Question. The room had not yet truly returned to stillness. The air was lighter, but not entirely normal, as if the echoes of what had just occurred still clung to every small corner. The motionless bodies on the floor remained there, a reminder that everything was not an illusion. Hael stood still, neither advancing nor retreating, her heart rate not yet fully stabilized, not out of fear, but because she understood what she had just witnessed. Draeven stood not far from her. His gaze had returned to stillness, but this time Hael was no longer deceived by that appearance. She had seen the thing behind it. She had touched it, and she knew clearly, if he had not stopped earlier, nothing would remain in this room. A long silence stretched between them. Not heavy like before, but clear, as if both were standing before the same truth, only no one had spoken it yet. Hael was the first to break it. "Why must you pretend to be weak, useless?" Her voice was low, not trembling, not evading, not out of curiosity, but confrontation. Draeven did not answer immediately. His gaze lingered on her a beat longer, as if weighing whether she truly wanted to know the answer or not. The silence stretched a bit more, enough to make the question heavier. "Because if they knew," he said, voice low and calm, "they would no longer exist. No threat, no emphasis." But that very calmness made the statement more terrifying than any warning. Hael said nothing immediately, not because she did not understand, but because she understood too well. What she had just seen was not power in the way people usually thought, not something to win a match, but something that could erase everything in a single moment. She looked at him a beat longer, then spoke slowly. "That is not something that should exist." Draeven did not rebut, did not deny. He only looked at her, and this time, his silence was no longer evasion. "Correct," he answered briefly. A single word, but enough to confirm everything. No explanation accompanied it, no justification, only acceptance. Hael tightened her hand slightly, her gaze remaining fixed. "Then why do you not let it out?" The question this time was no longer for others, but for him. Draeven was silent for a beat. His gaze darkened, no longer sharp and cold like before, but deeper, heavier. "I am not weak," he said slowly, as if each word had been weighed beforehand. "I am only restraining myself." The space between them seemed to stop for a moment, because once it escapes, he continued, voice still low, "there will be nothing left to hold back." Hael did not ask more. There was no need, because this time she understood better than any explanation. Not that they would disappear, but everything. A long silence stretched between them, but it was no longer a distance. It was closer, more dangerous, and clearer. Hael knew she should leave. After all she had just seen and heard, anyone else would do so. But she did not move. She still stood there. She chose to stay, and Draeven did not ask her to leave anymore. He only looked at her, a beat longer, as if for the first time there was a person who knew the entire truth, yet still did not turn away. The room fell into silence again. But this time, it was no longer the silence of a secret, but the silence of a thing already understood. And from that moment, Hael knew one thing, that no one else in this kingdom understood. Draeven did not pretend to be weak. He was only holding back the thing that could destroy everything. Part 2. The Misjudged King. Chapter 9. Betrayal. Everything began like an ordinary assembly. The great hall remained bright. The alphas stood in their positions, an order so perfect that nothing seemed suspicious. Hael stood in the back, observing out of habit, and it was that very perfection that made her stiffen. No one spoke. No one moved out of rhythm, yet something was wrong. Draeven entered, slow and steady as always. But after only one step, he halted, so slightly that most did not notice. But to Hael, the shift was too clear. His body did not fall, only faltered, as if something inside had just skewed off orbit. His gaze darkened, not losing control, but realizing it instantly. Hael stepped forward without thinking, but before she could touch him, Draeven held himself upright. Not because he was unaffected, but because he was struggling to keep the thing inside from shifting further. His energy was no longer stable. It wavered, distorting as if another force were pressing it out of its controlled state. "Stop." Draven's voice was very low, enough for only her to hear. But it was too late. An alpha stepped out from the ranks. Not a stranger, it was the one who always stood closest to him. Hael recognized him immediately, and that realization made her heart sink. "You should rest, Alpha King." His voice was unnervingly calm. Draven did not look at him, but Hael did, and she understood at once. This was not a spontaneous act, but a plan that had awaited the exact moment. The poison would not kill him instantly. It was not powerful enough for that, but it did something far more dangerous. It weakened the seal. Hael tightened her hands as she sensed the chaos rising within him. No longer locked tight as before. If that thing escaped in this state, there would be nothing left to control. "You must leave here." Her voice was lower, more urgent. Draven did not answer. He still stood there, not out of stability, but because he was balancing everything that remained. Hael had never seen him like this, not terrifying, but enduring. A tightening sensation filled her chest, not fear, but worry. An extreme worry, vivid and undeniable. "Draven." Her voice dropped. His gaze shifted to her for a brief moment. This time it was no longer cold as before, but heavy, as if he were calculating something not to win, but to prevent everything from collapsing. "Do not come near." His voice was low, not a warning, but protection. Hael did not retreat. Even though she understood clearly that if he lost control now, she would have no second chance, she still stood there, did not leave. And in that moment, she realized everything had changed. It was no longer curiosity, no longer responsibility. She did not want him to fall, not before these people, and certainly not alone. Around them, the other alphas did not move, because their plan had succeeded. Draven was weakening, not because he was weak, but because they had found a way to make him unable to control himself, and Hael could not stop it. Chapter 10. The Humiliating Trial. Rumors spread even before Draven stepped into the Great Hall. What had happened before was distorted into a different story, that the Alpha King had lost control, that he was so weak he could not stand on his own without Hael. But this time, the most dangerous thing was not words, but the gazes of those waiting for him to collapse, waiting for him to lose control. The doors opened, and Draven entered. Slow, steady, but not entirely as before. Hael followed behind, close enough to recognize details that no one else saw. There was a very small, almost negligible, but repeating hesitation in his stride, his hand slightly clenched and then released, as if his body no longer completely obeyed his will and command. The poison remained in his system, and the thing inside was reacting violently. Hael sensed it more clearly than ever. The seal was no longer stable. The small fissures were now more apparent, and from them, a very light pressure leaked out, not enough to explode, but enough to make the air around him grow heavier. The alphas standing closest began to sense it, not through thought, but through instinct. "Kneel." The voice rang out from the front, cold and resolute. Draven stopped. Not out of obedience, but because his body had just skewed off beat. Hael saw it clearly, and her heart constricted. He did not fall, but this time it was not because he was unaffected. It was because he was balancing everything that remained. He stood straight again, did not kneel, did not react, only silence. A laugh rang out. An alpha stepped forward, his gaze full of contempt. "It seems you no longer have the strength for even the simplest task. Or perhaps, you fear losing control before us all." A few did not laugh, but they did not protest. Hael took a step forward by reflex, then stopped when Draven gave a slight shake of his head. Only a very small movement, but enough for her to understand. Not because he could not resist, but because he was not permitted to. The atmosphere in the hall began to shift, not due to words, but due to the thing leaking from him. A very light pressure spread, almost impossible to name, but enough to make the closest alphas unconsciously retreat half a step before immediately standing still as if nothing had happened. They sensed it, but did not understand. "Your silence is truly disappointing." Another voice rang out, carrying clear ridicule. "Is this the Alpha King we must obey?" Draeven still said nothing, but Hael saw it clearer than anyone. Every passing second was a struggle for him to hold back the thing inside. She had never seen him exert himself to this magnitude, not in battle, but amidst insults. An Alpha advanced closer, close enough to become dangerous. "Perhaps we were mistaken. Perhaps he is not a threat." He stopped in front of Draeven, his voice full of irony. "Perhaps he is merely—" He did not finish speaking. The air suddenly grew heavy. Hael sensed it most acutely. The seal had just fractured another notch. Very small, but if it continued, there would be nothing left to hold back. "Enough." Hael's voice rang out, low but sharp. All eyes shifted to her. "Stop," she continued, more clearly. Not a command, but not asking permission either. An Alpha frowned. "Who do you think you are speaking to?" Hael did not answer immediately. She looked at them, then back at Draeven. This time she did not hesitate. At least he is still trying to control something that you cannot imagine. The air stalled for a brief beat, not because they understood, but because they did not. Draeven did not look at her. But for the first time, the pressure around him decreased very slightly, but real as if a small portion of control had been pulled back. The room fell into silence, but this time, it was no longer their control. It was his boundary. And Hael knew better than anyone that the boundary was very close to the breaking point. Chapter 11, The Fateful Battle. The decision was made faster than anyone expected. No debate, no protest, only a prepared conclusion. An Alpha King unable to control his power was no longer worthy of the throne, and a duel would prove it, not to challenge, but to end him. The opponent's name was announced, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. No introduction needed, no explanation required. Everyone knew who he was. The strongest remaining Alpha, the one who had never lost, chosen not to win, but to ensure there were no errors. This was no longer a match, but a sentence disguised as fairness. Hael stood amidst the crowd, but this time she was no longer observing calmly. Everything was too clear. This was an execution. She looked at Draeven, waiting for a reaction, a sign that he would refuse or end everything right here. But he did not. Draeven stood still, his gaze silent as usual. But Hael saw clearly what others did not. His breathing was not entirely even. His hand slightly clenched, then released as an unconscious reflex. And deep inside, the thing she had once touched was no longer stable. The poison remained. The seal was still fracturing, and every passing second made control more difficult. "You have the right to refuse," a voice rang out, carrying clear irony. "If you admit you lack the capability." A few laughs broke out. No one denied it. Hael took a step forward, but stopped when Draeven gave a slight shake of his head. A very small movement, but enough to hold her back. Not because he did not need help, but because he did not permit it. The opponent stepped into the center, each stride firm, gaze never leaving Draeven. No ridicule, no excess emotion. Only the focus of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. A battle where the outcome was already predetermined in everyone's minds. Hael tightened her hands. She sensed the misalignment within him not exploding, but shifting, as if only a small collision would be enough to shatter that entire control. If the match began, if he were forced to resist, there would be no way to hold it back. "Do not do this," she said softly, almost soundless. Draeven did not look at her, but he heard. He stepped up, slow and steady on the outside, but Hael knew the price behind it. He did not enter the battle as a man ready to fight, but as one holding back the thing that must not be released. The crowd retreated, forming a perfect circle. No one intervened, no one interfered. Everything was ready. Hael stood outside that circle, unable to step in, unable to stop it, and for the first time, she was truly helpless. The opponent stopped before Draeven, the distance just right to begin. No need for a signal, no need for words, only a moment, and everything would happen. Everyone believed this was the end. No one realized that this was not a battle, but the moment before the most dangerous thing in this room was forced to awaken. Chapter 12. Silence and the Awakened Monster. There was no signal to begin, no shout, only a span of silence that stretched longer than usual as the entire arena waited, and then Draven's opponent was the first to move. He lunged, swift and decisive, without probing, without hesitation. The first strike landed true. The sound rang out dry and clear amidst the still space. Draven's body skewed off beat, but he did not fall. Another strike, then another, each one heavier, more precise, and each time he did not dodge, did not resist, as if he were accepting it all. The crowd began to stir. It was no longer anticipation, but confirmation. Gazes shifted from suspicion to contempt. This was exactly what they believed. An alpha king who could not fight back. Hael took a step forward by instinct, her heart constricting. "Stop." Her voice rang out softly, but no one heard. The opponent did not stop. He accelerated, the blows becoming more relentless. And this time, when the heaviest strike descended, Draven's body faltered more visibly. In a moment, Hael thought he would fall. A cold sensation ran down her spine. Something very sharp coiled tightly around her heart, aching. It was not mere fear, but the realization that if this continued, he might truly die. Draven. This time her voice broke completely, mingled with trembling terror, her eyes glistening as if the slightest touch would cause tears to roll uncontrollably down her cheeks. She took another step, almost wanting to rush into the ring. But at that exact moment, Draven lifted his head. It was only a very small movement, slow, almost negligible. But as soon as that happened, the air changed. It was not quiet, but held back, as if everything in the space suddenly became heavier, thicker, harder to breathe. His opponent stiffened in the middle of the next movement, not because he wanted to stop, but because his body could no longer proceed. Instinct forced him to stand still, and not only him. Hael sensed it most clearly. The thing inside Draven was no longer being held. It was not breaking out chaotically, but opening. What she had sensed before was only a very small part. Now, it was present clear, heavy, overpowering. Pressure weighed down upon the entire arena. No one spoke, no one moved. Not because they chose silence, but because they could not. An alpha at the edge of the arena knelt first. No command, no signal, only reflex. A second followed, then a third. In seconds, the silence spread into an invisible wave, pulling everyone down in the same direction. Not submission, but terror. Hael still stood there, did not kneel. Not because she did not feel that pressure, but because she had stood near him long enough to understand that this thing was not directed at her. Or perhaps, she was the only one he did not crush. Her gaze did not leave him, and this time, she understood. Not the strongest alpha, not a king, but an entity that should never have existed in this world. Something that had once destroyed a kingdom, and was still being held within a body. The opponent before him could no longer stand firm. He knelt, not resisting, not fighting, only bowing his head as if it were the only way to survive 1 second longer. Draven stepped forward, slowly. No need to hurry, no need to attack. His mere presence alone was enough to end the match. Hael tightened her hands. If he continued, there would be nothing left to stop. Not this match, but everything. Draven. Her voice rang out, not loud, but clear. This time, he stopped. Not immediately, but enough to create a small shift in the pressure weighing down. His gaze shifted to her, and in that moment, everything around seemed to retreat, leaving only the distance between the two of them. The pressure did not vanish completely, but it decreased. Very slightly, but real. Draven did not advance further. He did not finish the match. He did not kill. He took a step back. Only one step, but enough to save everyone else remaining. The arena remained silent. No one dared to stand up. No one dared to look straight. But they all understood the thing they had never realized before. What they had just seen was not power, but destruction. And the only thing that had just stopped it was her, Hael. Chapter 13. The kingdom kneels. The silence did not end when Draven stepped back. It spread out, slow but unstoppable, like an invisible wave overflowing the entire arena and surging beyond the stone walls. No one gave an order. No one shouted. But one by one, those who had once stood tall with contemptuous glares began to bow. One person knelt, then another. Then the entire rank of alphas simultaneously lowered their bodies, as if an irresistible weight were forcing them down. Not ritual, not loyalty, but the pure instinct of a wolf standing before something beyond its magnitude of understanding. Those who had once mocked Draven no longer dared to look straight. Their gazes dropped, their breathing grew heavy, every movement cautious, as if the slightest deviation would be enough to be eliminated. No one needed to say it, but everyone understood the same thing. They were wrong. Not just a misjudgment, but a total misunderstanding. Draven stood amidst it all, needing no movement, needing no voice, yet his presence had altered the entire space. No longer a doubted Alpha King, but an entity that made the entire kingdom bow without coercion. Hael still stood there, in the middle of a sea of kneeling people. She did not bow, not because she was stronger than them, but because she was the only one who had seen him before all of this happened. Her gaze did not leave him, and this time, Draven looked back. The distance between them had not changed, but everything else was different. No longer a secret, no longer a suspicion, only the truth that both knew clearly. He could end it all, right here, with just one decision. No one could stop him. No one had the capability to stand up. Not a single alpha in this arena could survive if he loosened his control. The silence became heavier, not out of anticipation, but because everyone understood that everything depended on a single person. Draven, an alpha closest to him, could not endure the pressure. His body trembled, his head bowed lower, his voice breaking in terror. "Please, spare." No reaction, no answer. The others did not speak, but desperation was vivid on every face. No one thought of power anymore. No one thought of resisting. There was only one desire: survival. Hael tightened her hand, sensing clearly that the pressure was still there, still weighing down, still present as a reminder that everything could end at any moment. She knew better than anyone that if he continued, there would be nothing left to save. "Draven." Her voice rang out, not loud, but clear. Not a command, not a plea simply calling his name. His gaze lingered on her a beat longer. In that moment, there was no arena, no kneeling figures, no encompassing pressure, only the space between the two of them. And a choice. The pressure in the air wavered very slightly, almost negligible. But Hael felt it clearly. He was holding back. Not for them, but for her. Draven did not advance further, did not finish, did not destroy. He stood still, then slowly turned away. Just a simple movement, but enough to shatter the lingering state of tension. The pressure in the air decreased bit by bit, as if a storm had just been pulled back from the brink of explosion. The alphas remained kneeling. No one dared to stand up immediately. No one dared to believe they were still alive. Hael still stood there, and this time, she understood more clearly than any time before. Draven did not stop for them. He stopped because of her. Part IV, the most dangerous man, yet choosing to love. Chapter 14, The Truth Behind the Power. Night fell slower than usual, as if the entire kingdom had not yet truly awakened from what had transpired. No more noise, no more confrontational glares, only a heavy stillness enveloping the palace. But that quiet was not peace. It was the lull after something that had nearly spiraled out of control and had not yet entirely vanished. Draven stood alone by the window, not moving, not turning back. Darkness surrounded him, yet it could not hide the thing still present within. The pressure had withdrawn from the others, but it had not withdrawn from him. It was still there, deep inside his body, not exploding, but not sleeping either, as if merely awaiting a moment of weakness to surge once more. Hael paused at the door for a beat, as if understanding that just by stepping inside, everything would no longer be the same. But she opened the door and entered anyway, not hurried, without hesitation, simply a choice decided beforehand. He did not turn around as she approached, but he did not stop her either. "You should rest," she said, her voice low, maintaining just enough distance. A silence passed before he answered. "I cannot." His voice was not a refusal, but merely a simple, unchangeable truth. Hael stepped a bit closer, enough to clearly sense the instability she had only glimpsed before. The seal remained, but it was no longer perfect. The fissures did not disappear. They were merely being held by sheer will, and she understood that maintaining it was not a stable state, but a temporary delay. "What happened today?" she spoke, then stopped, because both knew exactly what she was referring to. Draven turned. His gaze was no longer cold as before, but deeper, more profound, as if there were no longer a reason to hide. "I am not weak," he said, his voice low and clear. "I am only restraining the thing that could destroy this world." There was no pride in that statement, no sense of flaunting power, just a truth he had carried for so long that it was no longer something needing explanation. Hael looked at him, not reacting immediately. For the first time, she did not see a king, nor did she see a terrifying entity, but a man standing at his own brink, holding back something that even he did not fully control. "You do not control it completely," she said slowly. Draven was silent for a beat, then answered, "No." A single word, but enough to confirm everything she had sensed. No denial, no concealment, only the truth. "Then why do you still hold it?" she asked, not out of doubt, but to hear him say it himself. Draven looked at her a bit longer before answering. "Because if I let go, there will be nothing left to hold." His voice remained low, calm, but this time, the meaning behind those words was clearer than anything else. Not a kingdom, not the alphas out there, but everything. A long silence stretched between them, but it was not heavy. It was clear, as if both were standing on the same side of the truth. "And one day," he continued, his voice a bit lower, "I will no longer be able to hold it." Not a hypothesis, but something he had accepted long ago. Hael did not turn away, did not retreat. She took another step, closing the distance between them, this time not stopping. The distance was no longer a safety boundary, but a choice. Draven did not retreat either. But in his gaze, for the first time, something appeared that had never been there. Not fear of others, but fear of hurting her. Hael's hand lifted, slowly, as if giving him the chance to stop her. But he did not. She touched him, a very light contact, but enough to make everything in that moment change. No violent reaction, no loss of control, only a gentle stillness. As if among all the things he was holding, the only thing he did not want to break was this very moment. "Then I will stay," she said, her voice very faint, but clear. Not a promise, but her choice. Draven looked at her, a beat longer. No more appraisal, no more doubt, but a very slow and expectant acceptance. In that moment, for the first time, the most dangerous thing within him was no longer the only thing controlling him. It was the decision of how to hold her close, without hurting her. Chapter 15. The only reason. The night had passed, but its sensation lingered in the air. Light filtered into the room enough to see everything clearly, yet not enough to soothe the heaviness remaining after what had transpired. There are things that do not vanish when the night ends. They merely settle, held back and waiting. Draven stood near the window as always, the distance between him and the world around him still distinct. He did not turn when the door opened, but he knew it was her. There are presences that can be recognized without needing to look. Hael entered without stopping. She no longer stood at the threshold as before, no longer with that brief moment of hesitation. Her decision had been made before she even entered this room. "You should leave," Draven said, his voice low, not a command, but like something he was forced to utter. Hael did not halt her pace. "You do not truly want that." His silence was not a denial, but an inability to say otherwise. Draven turned, his gaze lingering on her a beat longer. "Staying by me is not safe," he said slowly, each word clearer. "You have seen that. I know." Her answer came immediately, without evasion, without hesitation. The distance between them narrowed steadily as she continued to step forward, not hurried, without coercion, yet without stopping. Draven did not retreat, but the tension in his body was clearer than any words. Not because he feared her, but because he knew exactly what could happen if he lost control. "You do not understand," he said, his voice lower, almost exclusively for her. "I am not something that can stand beside you." Not because he was weak, but because he was too dangerous. Hael stopped, right in front of him. "But I am still standing here." Her statement was not loud, but strong enough to assert a truth. Draven's gaze shifted very slightly, as if there were something he could no longer hold back as completely as before. He looked at her a bit longer, as if weighing something he had never permitted himself to think of until now. "You are the only reason." He paused for a very short beat. "I do not let it out." There was no gentleness in that statement, no room for retreat, only a heavy truth that he could not take back. The air between them slackened, not because of distance, but because of the meaning behind those words. Hael did not retreat. She took another step, erasing the final distance between the two of them. Her hand lifted, slowly but resolutely, as if she had decided beforehand and had no intention of changing. When her fingers touched him, no explosion occurred. There was no violent reaction like previous times, yet it was not entirely normal either. Draven stiffened for a very short moment, not because of a loss of control, but because the thing inside him had changed in a way he had not expected. Hael sensed it immediately. Not pressure, not chaos, but a very light stability, almost impossible to recognize unless standing close enough. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly. Draven did not answer immediately, but he knew. The thing inside him was no longer fracturing further, no longer trying to escape outward as before. It settled, not because it was forced, but because something else was holding it back. He looked down at her hand, still resting on him, then looked back at her. For the first time, his silence was no longer a defense, but something deeper. "You are not afraid," he said softly, not asking, but realizing. Hael shook her head very slightly. "Not because you are not dangerous," she replied, her voice still calm, "but because I have chosen to stay." That statement was not loud, but this time it was no longer just words. It became an affirmation, a truth she had proven through action. Draven did not retreat, nor did he stop her. For the first time, he did not need to maintain the distance between the two of them. Not because he had gained complete control, but because there was something else holding him back. The air in the room was no longer heavy as before. Danger still existed, still remained there, but it was no longer the only thing that defined him. Hael still stood before him, not leaving. And this time, Draven no longer tried to push her away, because he understood the only thing that could hold him back was not power. It was her. Chapter 16. The Final Secret. The air in the room had shifted, yet it was not entirely peaceful. After that prior moment of closeness, things did not return to how they were. Instead, they became clearer. The distance between them was gone, but the truth between them had not yet been fully spoken. There were things that could no longer remain in silence. Hael did not withdraw her hand immediately. She still stood before him, clearly sensing the unusual stability that had just emerged. Not because he was stronger, but because the thing inside him was reacting in a different way. It was unlike any alpha she had ever known. "You are not like them," she said, her voice low but resolute. Not a question, but a conclusion. Draven did not answer at once. His gaze stayed on her, not evading, yet not easily accepting the act of speaking it. A silence passed, heavier than previous times, as if this time, if he spoke, there would be no way back. "Never," he finally spoke. Only 2 words, but enough to shatter every assumption. Hael did not retreat. "Then what are you?" Draven was silent for a brief moment, as if weighing not whether he should speak, but to what extent. His gaze did not evade hers, but he no longer maintained the distance as before. "I am still an alpha," he said slowly, his voice low and clear, but not the kind they understand. There was no emphasis, yet that statement was enough to change everything. Hael frowned slightly, not out of fear, but because she began to understand something deeper. Draven looked at her for another beat, then continued, slower this time. "They think I have no wolf, because the thing inside me is not what they call a wolf." A long silence followed. No further explanation was needed. Draven turned away for a very brief moment, as if that memory was not something he wished to touch again. When he turned back, his voice was lower. "A part of me does not belong to this world." Hael remained silent, watching him, not searching for signs of danger, but to understand what that meant. Hael tightened her hand, but did not withdraw it. "That is why you sealed yourself," she said, piecing together what she had seen and sensed. Draven nodded very slightly. "Not to protect them," he continued, "but to stop myself. No justification, no denial, only the admission of a naked truth." Before, he spoke slower, as if each word carried a memory he did not wish to recall. "I could not hold it. No need for more words." Hael understood. Not a battle, not a defeat, but an event that had occurred. Something that had been destroyed. "You," she began, but did not finish. Draven did not complete the sentence for her. He did not need to, for the silence between them was enough to fill that void. A kingdom, a place that no longer existed, not because of war, but because of him. Hael looked at him a beat longer. If it were before, perhaps she would have retreated, but now, she did not. "And you are still holding it," she said, her voice unchanged. Not a question, but another truth. Draven looked at her, his gaze no longer defensive this time. "Until I no longer can." A simple answer, but not a light one. Another long silence stretched between them, not tense, but deeper than any time before. No longer about what might happen, but what certainly would. One day, he would not be able to hold it. But Hael did not turn away, did not retreat. "Then I will be there," she said, her voice very faint, but without hesitation. Not a promise, but a certain choice. Draven said nothing for a moment. His gaze lingered on her, as if searching for a sign he could not find. No fear, no doubt, only her. And that was more dangerous than anything else, because for the first time, he had a reason to lose control. Chapter 17. The closest moment. The atmosphere shifted before anything occurred. There was no overt sign, no sound, but Hael sensed immediately that the thing inside Draeven was no longer as stable as before. It was no longer settling as it did in quiet moments. Instead, it wavered very slightly, yet enough to make the space around him grow heavier. Draeven did not move. He stood still, but this time it was not out of absolute control, but because he was struggling to hold back. His hand clenched slowly, as if loosening his grip even a fraction would be enough for everything to cross the limit. Hael stepped forward without stopping. She had sensed this before, but this time was different. Danger was no longer a distant possibility, but a vivid presence right before her. "Do not come near," Draeven said, his voice lower than usual. Not because he wanted to push her away, but because he knew what would happen if she did not. Hael did not obey. She continued toward him, until only a single step remained between them. "You are losing control," she said, not a question, but an undeniable truth. "Leave," he replied, clearer this time, yet it was not a command. It was merely a final effort to keep her away from something even he was not certain he could stop. Hael shook her head. No. A single word. But it left no room for change. The tension in Draven's body increased visibly. He lowered his gaze for a brief moment, as if trying to restrain the thing inside with everything he had left. "You do not understand," he said, his voice lower, almost strained. "If you leave, I can still hold it." He paused for a very short beat, then continued, slower. "But if you stay..." He did not finish, but he did not have to. Hael understood. She took another step, erasing the distance between them. This time, she did not just touch him. She took his hand, firm and without hesitation. In that exact moment, the reaction occurred. Not an explosion, but a violent conflict. The thing inside him wavered more intensely, as if refusing interference, as if trying to shatter everything. The air in the room grew heavier, the pressure rising sharply, making everything around them feel compressed. Draeven stiffened. Not out of weakness, but because for the first time, he was not sure he could hold on. "Hael," his voice dropped, nearly a warning, but no longer steady enough. Yet she did not let go, did not retreat. Instead, she held tighter. "Look at me," she said, her voice not loud but clear. Draeven did not want to, but he looked regardless. Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything changed. It did not vanish completely, but it stalled. The chaos remained, but it no longer occupied everything. Hael sensed it clearly, not because she was stronger, but because he was bracing himself to hold back this time, not just for himself, but for her. "Then do not let go," she said softly, not a plea, but a choice spoken once more. Draeven looked at her longer, the struggle in his gaze clearer than anything else. "You do not understand," he said, no longer maintaining a distance this time. "If you leave, I will no longer hold anything back. Not a threat, simply the truth." Hael did not evade. "Then, I will not leave." Her answer was simple, but this time it was no longer a temporary choice. It was a commitment. Her hand still held his, and this time, Draeven did not pull away, did not push her away, did not maintain the distance. He stood there, and for the first time, permitted himself not to let go. The air in the room gradually stabilized. It did not vanish entirely, but it was enough not to destroy everything. And this time, it was not because he was stronger. It was because he was no longer alone. Chapter 18. A New World. The silence following the chaos did not vanish immediately. It settled slowly, as if the world itself needed time to readjust after standing too close to the brink of collapse. But this time, nothing broke. Nothing was destroyed. Everything remained intact. And that was enough to change everything. News spread faster than any command. Without a declaration, without a ritual. What had transpired in the arena was enough to etch itself into every alpha in the kingdom. No one mocked any longer. No one doubted. No one dared to stand before him with a defiant glare as they once had. Yet Draeven did nothing to consolidate that power. He did not summon, did not punish, did not prove anything further. He simply stood there, as he always had. But this time, no one looked at him as a weakling anymore. The difference lay not in the power, but in how he chose to wield it. Hael stood beside him, not too close, but no longer at a distance as before. There was no ritual to mark it, no title declared, But everyone understood what her position was. Not one who followed behind him, but the only one who could stand beside him without being crushed. An alpha knelt as they walked through the great hall, then another. No one gave orders, no one looked at each other, but everyone bowed their heads. Not because of laws, but because of instinct. Draeven did not stop, nor did he look down. But when Hael's hand lightly touched his, very faintly, almost negligible, he stiffened for a brief moment. Not enough for others to notice, but enough for her to feel. The presence around him did not vanish. It was still there, deep and heavy, still something that could crush anyone standing too close. But this time, it did not overflow. It was held back, not because he was coerced, but because he chose so. "You are still holding it," Hael said softly, not a question, but a realization. Draeven did not look at her immediately. "Because you are still here," he answered, his voice low. There were no further words, yet it was enough to clarify everything. They stopped at the highest terrace of the palace. Below, the entire kingdom stretched out, quieter than ever before. Not because of peace, but because no one dared to challenge or break that balance anymore. Draeven looked down, not as a king inspecting his territory, but as a man weighing whether this world was worth preserving. Hael said nothing. She simply stood there, close enough for him to know he was no longer alone. A light breeze swept past, carrying a stillness very different from before. No more chaos, no more exploding pressure, but that did not mean it had disappeared. It was still there, merely sleeping, and this time, it was not because it had weakened, but because there was a reason for it not to awaken. Draeven did not leave that spot. He did not turn away. And for the first time, he no longer needed to pretend to be weak. He simply chose not to destroy this world, because she was still standing in it. Bonus chapter. When the world sleeps still, the night fell quieter than any night before. There was no longer pressure weighing down the kingdom, no longer fearful gazes creeping through the darkness. Everything seemed to have returned to a state of balance. Yet it was not true peace. It was merely a stillness held by something very few understood. Draeven stood on the highest balcony of the palace, where the entire kingdom could be seen stretching out below. The faint light from distant torches was not enough to fully illuminate the darkness, but it was not necessary. He did not need to see clearly to know that everything was still there, still existing, still undestroyed. His hand rested lightly on the cold stone battlement, not clenched, not tense, yet not entirely relaxed. The silence around him no longer carried the chaos of before, but it had never truly vanished. It merely retreated, like something waiting. Hael stepped out from behind without making much sound. She did not need to announce her presence, nor did he need to turn around. She paused for a beat, then walked to stand beside him. Her presence did not break the stillness, but made it more stable. "You are not sleeping again," she said, her voice low, not a reproach, nor a question. Draeven did not turn immediately. "I do not need to," he replied, but this time his voice was no longer closed off as before. A silence passed between them, but it was not heavy. It was like an established equilibrium, needing no words, yet felt by both. "It is still there," Hael said softly, not a question, but a realization. Draeven understood instantly. Always. He answered no denial, no concealment, just a simple truth. Hael turned to look at him. "But it is quieter," she said, more certain this time. Draeven was silent for a short beat. "Only when you are here," he replied, his voice low but clear. Hael said no more. She lifted her hand, placing it naturally on his chest without hesitation. This time there was no violent reaction, no rising pressure, no resistance, only a deeper silence, as if the thing inside him were settling completely. Hael sensed it clearly, not because it had disappeared, but because it was choosing not to awaken. "Not because you are stronger," she said softly. Draeven looked down at her hand. "No," he replied after a short beat. "Because of you?" No redundant words added. The night breeze swept past, carrying a sensation entirely different from before. No more tension, no more risk of immediate explosion. But that did not mean everything had disappeared. It was still there, merely sleeping. Before, Draeven spoke, his voice deeper, as if uttering a memory he did not wish to touch again. "When it awakens, nothing can stop it." Hael did not withdraw her hand. "But now there is," she said, her voice calm, not a hope, but a truth she had chosen to believe. Draeven did not answer immediately. He looked at her longer, more intently, as if weighing not whether what she said was right or wrong, but whether he dared to believe in it. Far on the horizon, a black cloud drifted slowly across the night sky, obscuring a portion of the faint light above. Neither of them noticed it, but that change still occurred, silent and unavoidable. Something outside this kingdom still existed, not belonging to the quiet they possessed. And if one day it awakens, no one knows what will happen. But right now, that does not matter. Hael still stood there, her hand still resting on his chest, and the thing inside him remained silent. Not because it had weakened, but because it had learned there was a reason not to destroy everything. Draven did not leave that spot. He did not pull her away, nor did he maintain a distance. For the first time, he did not have to choose between control and destruction, because there was something else holding him back. And that was not power. It was her.